Ladies and gentlemen, glad to have you join this week's episode of the Consciouspreneur Journal. This is Ahmed, your host and founder of the Voice of the Entrepreneur podcast. I hope you've had a good week so far and that you've started on the right track for planning and implementing all the great stuff that you want to have happen this year for you. I know I took some time to reflect and understand my own direction for the year, and I've been working to come up with a plan as to how I'm going to achieve that. I will be sharing some of my thoughts on this planning process for the year, and I would be delighted to hear more about your own thoughts and your own process. So I invite you to join our Facebook group at facebook.com/group/voice of the entrepreneur and participate in the conversation that is taking place there that will give you more fuel to drive your ambitions this year. And I think more importantly, make you feel like you belong to a community where others understand the path that you're on. My friend, this week's Consciouspreneur Journal is part 2 of the conversation with Shanann Charania from last week, where we talked about the perception we have of our own thinking process, and more importantly, how we perceive thought that can help us overcome the dominating and often self-defeating state that our incessant thinking can keep us in. This week, we talk about how most people can get stuck on insecure thoughts by dwelling on it and what you can do to overcome that insecurity. The concept of the self-saboteur and how it is nothing more than a self-created label that keeps us feeling undeserving of what we really want. Next is letting go of the attachment to our limited identities that we hold for ourselves as a way to break through to any level of success. And finally, how the key to increasing productivity is to pursue tasks that harness your creativity. It has been a powerful conversation with several insights that hopefully shift the way you see your thinking and puts you in the driver's seat of how you can harness your thinking to create the results that you want. So, without a further ado, let's dive right into it. Success can be measured in very different ways. We all have different meanings of success. For me, it's completely different than what it may be for you and for other people. But what I'm seeing quite a lot. I've had over 40 guests on my show. I talk to lots of entrepreneurs. There's one thing that I see that I want to explore, and it relates really well into thought, is there are some people that might have a similar idea or a concept, and they will run with it and will make it into an incredible success. And when I say success, again, from the relative perspective of how we measure success in our society. Right. And then there are others that will have the same concept, same idea, and will run with it, but will not be able to turn it into a success. You see that in your profession quite a lot with coaches. There's tons of coaches out there that are incredibly successful. There are more coaches that are not successful. Concepts are the same, maybe methodologies are the same. Why is it? And I want this to be tied into thought because in my mind, it must be. It must be the way that we see the world, the way that we see ourselves in it, that creates the kind of reality around us that is successful in our minds or not successful. And mind you, that someone who is successful materially might not feel successful in their minds. And that's the case with somebody who is not materially successful but feels very successful in their own mind. So let's explore this topic here, Shanann, of why is it that some people with the same resources available will have a great level of success while others with the same resources do not achieve that? And how is thought connected with all this?
That's a very interesting question. I see that the people that are able to use their resources, where resources are the same for everyone, maybe in that position, but like you said, some people run with it, some people get stuck on it. Why would that be? So as far as I can see it and the experience I've had, I see that some people can see that they're having insecure experience created by thought. If you really want to tie it to thought and use insecurity as an example, I have this great idea. It's extremely creative. It's lighting me up. I'm inspired by it. I want to put it into action. And some people will get I would say everyone would get the thought that says, what if it doesn't work out? Right? So some people will be able to see through that and go, this one is going to work out. It's pulling me. Yes, the what ifs are there, but it's pulling me. Kind of like the example you gave about, trying to be on stage, but having this insecurity, but then still doing it and going, I'm going to do it. And then it subsided. Those thoughts left. Versus other people who will get those thoughts and believe them and expand their attention on them. So their attention on this one will shrink and this one will grow, and that'll become their reality. So therefore they'll act according to that reality, which will put them in an insecure state without action.
Right. So you're saying, like, to dissect that a little more, some people may have the thought, let's take the same example of the stage fright or the anxiety around it, is that I will be, let's say, ridiculed, or I will not be liked, so I will stop doing, or I will stop taking that action of being in front of people on a stage, versus somebody else who will say, even though I have this thought, I will push through it, and I will go on the other side of it and let experience bring me to whatever good that there is on the other side. Is that really the difference when it comes to people understanding and perceiving their thought and going past it?
Yes, I would say in a very simple way, yeah.
Okay.
The most simplistic level is that it's like, if we can understand that our thought creates our reality, everyone's thinking creates their reality in the moment. So that's like the fundamental level. You can explain that in different ways. I've talked to people and asked them that same question, and they've said, you know what the work that I'm doing is a lot more important than my doubts. I used to do those I Dare You to Speak events, and I used to get really nervous. But I was so empowered by it. I was like, man, this is so important that people get out on the stage and speak about their story and people be inspired. That was more important to me than my insecurities. So therefore I went through with it every single month. But that's saying the exact same thing. It's like, this thought is so much more important to me than this thought. So I'm going to follow this thought, right? So that on a fundamental level, it is just thought, but people talk about it in different ways. Another way I've heard it is, why do you get anxious before you go on stage? The best answer I've heard that I relate to as well is that I get anxious when I go on stage when I'm about to do something important to me, right? If it's not important to me, I'd probably go on stage and blab about it, and it doesn't matter to me so much, so I don't care about it.
Sure.
And that's a great way to look at it, because it tells you, yeah, it empowers you. It's like, man, you know what? This work is really important to me, and therefore I'm getting nervous about it. So that's a way to talk about it where people can relate to it. But again, if I was to step back and look at the same exact sentence from a fundamental level, this thought of this being important to me is more important than the thought of me not doing it. Both are present. Which one do I want to focus on? Because, you know, what we focus on expands.
Yes, absolutely. That's so true. What we focus on expands. And I see that very much in my life, where if there's something that I'm focusing on and I work towards it, that it there's no other choice but for it to expand. And that's a very empowering thought, again, because it makes me feel like thoughts are not in control of me at the end of the day, that I am. There's also this concept of the self-saboteur, if you will, how people will sabotage their own success because somewhere deep down they think that they're not deserving of the success. Of course, this is a thought that creates that, but it is real. I can see it for myself. I see it with other people as well, where people will either quit or not allow themselves to get into something, or allow a certain benefit or advantage to come into their lives because they believe deep down that they are not deserving of that.
That's a great question, because I think anybody can relate to that when they're going after anything that they want to achieve or be outside their comfort zone a little bit and stretch themselves. So on a fundamental level, again, they're going to have a thought that I don't deserve this because of my past or because of something that failed before, and therefore I will not be able to get this. And they have a choice. They can follow that thought or realize it's a thought, and they can follow the dream. That is the fundamental difference, I would say, between people that do self-sabotage themselves and see no success versus people that go through it even if they have the thought. Because everyone has the thought.
Right.
The second thing is, it looks like it's self-sabotage, but if I was to look at my own experience with my clients, with myself, with people that I've spoken with, I have not spoken to even one single person that has intentionally sabotaged themselves. Right? Because our common sense doesn't want us to fail. Our common sense wants us to thrive. So no one intentionally sabotages themselves. All they've done is started to believe something that's untrue about themselves, and then that has played out in their lives, in a way where they haven't pursued their dreams or completed the project or whatever.
Mm.
And then there's a label placed on it. Oh, I'm self-sabotaging myself.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, if we are looking at it at that level that's already created, then people start to shame themselves. Oh my God, I'm good for nothing. Look, I did it again, so on and so forth.
Mm.
But that level is not helpful to look at because it's a created level already. What we want to do is look at how it's created. And how I look at it is, if I'm not doing something that I want to do, what's stopping me? Is it the thinking that I'm doing in the moment? Is it that I'm relating it to a past failure and hanging on to it and pretending that it's going to, creating a story around how it's going to play out again? You want to look there, because at that level, you're not at self-sabotage. You're not labeled it. You haven't titled yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And when you start looking there, common sense starts to happen, expose itself and tell you that, well, the past does not create the future. You do have a choice in that. Which way do you want to go? If you think you can't do it, why is it can't you do it? Is it because of the skill set that you need to acquire? Is it because of the connections you might need to make? Is it because you need to serve more powerfully? And at those levels, you can adjust it, right? So for different people, it's different things, because some might find those levels easy and other levels hard. Some might find that their work needs to be at that level. But either way, the level of self-sabotage is not helpful to look at, because it's already a created level. Mm-hmm. It's already something it's an experience you've created. And the only thing that can come out of looking there, as far as I can see, is you're going to continue to shame yourself because you're sabotaging yourself. And again, like I said in the beginning, it's very important to note that nobody intentionally sabotages themselves. Nobody.
Guys, I wanted to take a quick break and discuss a little bit more the Quiet Leadership Masterclass that's starting in January 2018. I've partnered up with Faris Khalife, a leading quiet leadership coach, to deliver this masterclass and co-host it myself. The last one we did was really successful. We had over 25 quiet leaders that participated, giving us the chance to serve them. And we know they got a lot out of the masterclass because they shared some incredible changes that they were seeing in their own lives. I wanted to give you a quick rundown of what you will learn in the masterclass. So here we go. Week 1, the topic will be Uncover, which will help you understand who you are, your personality traits, your values, strengths, and your why. Week 2 is about Creating. By uncovering what is true and unique about you from week 1, you will learn how to create the message that reflects your authentic self and speaks to your audience and or community. Week 3 will be all about Communicating. At this stage of the masterclass, you will be clear on who you are, your message, and your audience. Now you will learn how you can communicate your message effectively to your community. And finally, week 4 will be all about growing your brand and your business by learning strategies that work to grow your community organically and spread your message more effectively. So if you consider yourself a quiet leader who is looking to spread your message, get clarity on who you are, grow your brand and your business, then check out the course page at introvertleader.voebheard.com to learn more about the content and start dates. Yes, you would think so, right? That nobody would want to intentionally sabotage themselves because, if you look at it, it's like you're really hurting yourself, and common sense shouldn't allow that, because we are all here to thrive, to survive, and to do the best that we can. But maybe another layer of this self-sabotage thing is that what comes to mind is the identity that we hold for ourselves. That when you look at yourself, you see yourself as a certain way. When I look at myself, I see myself as a certain way. Some of the identities can be very empowering. And what I see, again, when I speak to entrepreneurs from all different backgrounds, is that the ones that are really doing big things in their lives, they have an identity about themselves that they really believe they are ready or they have the capacity to do big things. The ones that cannot, but have a dream to do it, but seem to be running into roadblocks, is because they see themselves as not big enough players to play in that arena. That's something that I am experiencing or seeing with entrepreneurs, with people from all walks of life. This identity, Shinan, that to me has become one of the key things, even in my own journey, to see how I can play on a bigger level, is if I evolve the way that I see myself and the way that I see myself showing up in the world and how much footprint I can have on this world. If you have an identity that is not empowering, how do we turn that identity in a game that you're playing and you want to play on a bigger level? How do you then switch that identity or change it so that you can start seeing yourself as one of the big boys, or at least worthy of playing with the big boys?
Yeah, that's interesting. What I have found most helpful, Ahmed, is not being attached to any identity. And why I say that is because although it's empowering to look at yourself in an empowering way and to believe empowering things about yourself so that it can propel you, what I see comes with that is, number one, it creates a boundary. You might be in a really good space and look at yourself in a really good way, but you can't see beyond that. Right? So it might be a wonderful boundary you've created. I am so empowered by how I look at myself, and my self-identity is there. But what we're missing is what else is possible that you've just shut down unconsciously because you've created this identity about yourself. The second point is most people do that to get away from a bad identity, right? So if you don't have disempowering beliefs about yourself, you're likely not going to try and switch it, because that's the only reason I see where people want an empowering belief about themselves is because they're used to having a disempowering one. The most useful thing, again, is to look at how all identity fluctuates. How I see myself at 14 is different from 26, to different to 32, to different to now. And what that tells me that if it fluctuates, it's away from reality. It's away from truth, because truth doesn't fluctuate. And what is useful is to move into having no identity about myself. How that's been useful in my life is it helps me make things about others more than myself. So I'm in service more than I can ever imagine when it's not about me. I can serve people that are more successful than me because I don't need to be at a certain level or see myself at a certain level before serving them. I don't need to limit myself in comparing my knowledge with somebody else because it's about them. So that's one way, moving into a place of having less respect for how you see yourself, whether it's disempowering or empowering, serves you more powerfully. The second point I want to make is you mentioned that the people that you've spoken with have this empowering belief about themselves, and that's helped them. That could very well be a useful thing to have. I'm not saying it's not valid or useless, but I also see that when people do have that, the opposite is very likely, right? So it's like saying, if you have doubts, then you're going to have beliefs, and if you have beliefs, then you're going to have doubts. If you like happiness, you better be prepared for sadness. You have the opposite. The people that are really successful that I've spoken with, I've seen that they find it that the empowering beliefs about themselves and the self-identity that they have, they want to adopt that for levels of success, but they find it hard to maintain because they always have to maintain that picture of themselves before they do something. So it takes a lot of energy.
Yes.
And it is going to fade, whether it's in 5 years or 25 years or 30 years. It's not sustainable. It takes a lot to sustain this image of yourself when life is continuously giving you new experiences and new moments and new possibilities. But we're too busy hanging on to this one that we think is so empowering. We're missing what's actually going to empower us even larger. So yeah, that's where I would go with that. Is like, I'm not saying that it's a useless thing to have. I just see that there's so much more potential in not making it about yourself at all.
Even when you don't make it about yourself, you're still seeing yourself as the person that can maybe serve on a greater level. So I think you're right. To have a certain strong identity about yourself, that you're a certain way and only then are you allowed or able to play in a different game, can be like a double-edged sword where it can go the other way as well. But to see yourself as somebody that can serve on a great level and does not have to identify or adhere with a certain identity could be more powerful. I definitely see that as well.
Yeah. So just to add to that is like how I've seen that play out in my life, and this has come from mistakes and being really insecure about what kind of value I can provide and am I good enough and all that. how what you just said, it's a double-edged sword. Well, the only thing left to do there is to experiment, right? Because if you're experimenting, for example, with service, you said, if I can see myself as somebody that serves, then only I'll able to kind of play in that world. But for me to see that, experimenting with it will show me the reality of it instead of trying to believe in myself and try to empower myself. I can go and experiment with it, and then, you know, who's a better measurement of your success than your clients? Like, I can talk about me all day, but they're going to tell you exactly how good I am. That kind of reflects itself. Like, experiment, come back to it. Experiment, come back to it. And then whether you see yourself as somebody that can serve or not, your clients will. And that's a good measurement to go by. And it's a helpful one to go by.
Totally. Shanann, since this is a conversation, is there anything that you want to address, a specific topic that you want to talk about real quickly here? Is there something that comes to mind?
Not really anything that I would like to open up to go deeper into, but I think what we've talked about, I guess it links really nicely with the topic of creativity. And that kept popping up, and I think that would be a great thing to talk about. And why I say that is because a lot of people that I work with, they really want to focus on how productive they are, right? How can I have more balance in my life and balance my work life? How can I be more productive in areas that I'm unproductive in? How can I manage my time better so I can be more productive in the day versus the evening, and so on? And what I have found is that we are more productive, or most productive, when we're not focusing on being productive, but we're focusing on being creative. Because productivity happens to be a byproduct of creativity. Right? So, kind of an exaggerated example I give my clients is Albert Einstein had 24 hours in a day too. Why aren't we doing that level of work?
I hear he was a lazy man.
Yeah, it's been perceived that way too, right? And so why I wanted to touch on that is because when we're talking about how thought creates our reality and how our experience is created moment to moment and how it can be empowering or disempowering and so on, I see that creativity plays a huge role in it. And there's a huge misunderstanding about creativity that I harbored for years, that I see a lot of people that I work with have a misunderstanding there. And I'm still learning about it, but what I've seen is that the misunderstanding is that we need to be, well, put it this way. Some people think they're more creative than others. Some people think they're less creative than others. But what I've seen to be true is that if you focus on being more creative, you will see that it's not actually a personal power. It's not that one person's more, one person's less. It's just that if you see how you can bring more creativity in your life by the thought-created experiences you're having, you become more curious about your own creativity rather than productivity. You're able to excel in your productivity. It becomes less effort that you use in how productive you are.
So you're saying get curious about your creativity?
Get curious about your creativity. Get curious about how you can expand on your creativity, right? So another way to say it is, okay, so I'll put it two ways. On a fundamental level, you're going to have thoughts that are completely destructive, non-creative. They're going to shrink your state of mind and have you insecure and all that. You're also going to have thoughts that are very creative, that are nice ideas, that are expanding your world. And the reality is that we have those thoughts equally. Some people might disagree. No, I have more insecure thoughts than anything else. No, it's not true. You're just focusing more there. So focus on the ones that are more creative, that are inspiring, that help you become more curious. And as we do that, the productivity in our life seems to take care of itself in a more effortless way. We seem to obviously feel good because those thoughts feel better than these thoughts. But knowing that you have access to both, and it's what you focus on that will expand, changes the game on how your work-life balance is, your productivity at work is, your timetable is, how you manage your time and your schedule is. Really comes in how you're focusing on your creative thoughts, which is available equally to everyone. Yeah, I wanted to just point that out because I see a lot of people talking about that in my world.
Yeah, and I really love the fact that you touched on this piece, because I can see how when I am creative, when I am doing things that harness my creativity, that my productivity is also much higher than otherwise. That is a definite statement for sure. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, and perhaps, the topic of our next conversation, we could dive deeper into creativity. But I guess what I'd leave with, as an ending thought to this is, yes, without creativity, really, I see that productivity would be a chore. It would be something that you would
Yeah,
have to force yourself to do. And then how productive can you be if it is coming from a forceful place? Just doesn't happen, right?
absolutely.
And that's why people get burnt out. People feel that they can't perform because they're coming from a place where productivity is number one and creativity is on the back burner, or sometimes it's not even part of the equation. So yeah,
Absolutely.
yes, and as entrepreneurs, I think this point that you've made is so critical to harness that creativity and to foster it so that your productivity can match the levels of creativity.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. That's a great point.
Yeah.
And you sealed it in really nicely. Yeah, love that.
Yeah, awesome, man. Man, again, it's a riveting conversation with you every time we sit down, and we talked about thought. I think the listeners are going to have such a good time just kind of unraveling this process of thought and how really thought affects our lives in all different ways. Or maybe to put it even better in the way that we've discussed, is how we let thought affect our lives.
Right.
So
Right.
great conversation. Again, thank you so much for sitting down here with me and having this wonderful conversation, Shanab.
Thank you as well, Ahmed. I really enjoyed it. It was fun.
Awesome. My fellow Consciouspreneur, I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Consciouspreneur Journal with Shanann. I hope that it reveals something that helped you shift your perspective. I'd say listen to the parts that resonate with you a few times over and discuss the implications that could have in your own life. And then I invite you to the Facebook group if you have any questions around anything that we touched on this conversation, or if you want to start a discussion revolving around this topic. If you believe you got something of value from this podcast, please rate and review the podcast on iTunes. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to the newsletter on voebheard.com so you don't miss out on the really amazing guests and some powerful conversations that we have lined up in the upcoming weeks for you. Until I see you again next time, have a great one, my friend.